Nominated Civil War General Ulysses S. Grant. He was a great soldier but had no political experience. Democrats could only denounce military reconstruction, thus it was disorganized. Republicans waved the bloody shirt and used Grant's popularity to elect him. Grant beat Seymour, who didn't accept the redemption of the greenbacks and thus doomed his party. Population continued to grow due to immigration and politics became greatly corrupt. Fisk and Gould attempted to corner the gold market, but their plan failed when the Treasury sold gold. Tweed cheated the city out of $200 million, but New York Times found proof of his misdeeds, and he died in jail. Panic of 1873 causes were overspeculation and too easy credit. In 1878, the Bland-Allison Act instructed Treasury to buy and coin between $2 million and $4 million worth of silver bullion each month. The Gilded Age term was coined by Mark Twain. Times looked good, but it was filled with corruption. The Electoral Count Act of 1877 set up electoral commissions that consisted of 15 men selected from the Senate, the House, and Supreme Court, which would count the votes. Reconstructed ended, military returned northward, and whites asserted their power. Literary requirements emerged, registration laws, and poll taxes began, and they were all targeted towards black voters. Most blacks became sharecroppers or tenant farmers. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled Plessy v. Ferguson that separate but equal facilities were constitutional. Grover Cleveland supported laissez-faire capitalism. He delighted business workers and bankers. In 1892, the Populist Party emerged. Main call was inflation-free coinage of silver. Cleveland was later embarrassed by the Wilson-Gorman tariff. The Supreme Court struck down on income tax, so it looked like all politicians were tools of the wealthy. Chapter 24. Congress gave railroad companies 155,504,994 acres. Railroads gave land their value. Many pioneers overinvested on land. Old Eastern railroads often financed the successful Western railroads. Advancements in railroads included the steel rail, air brake, telegraphs, and block signals. Train ascendants were common. Railroads helped the rapid industrialization of America and generated a huge market and lots of jobs. Railroads created 4 national time zones. Jay Gould made millions embezzling stocks from railroad companies. The railroads were filled with corruption, but people were slow to combat it even though they were aware of it. In 1860, U.S. was the 4th largest manufacturer in the world. By 1894, it was number 1 because of electricity, cheap labor, and natural resources. Steel became cheap and abundant after the Bessemer process. Many newly rich people worked up from poverty. The South during this time remained agrarian despite industrial advances. Inflow of immigrants provided a labor force to work in poor environments. This labor led to strikes. Civil War helped labor unions grow. Knights of Labor were involved in many strikes, but half failed. Chapter 25. From 1870 to 1900, the American population doubled and population in cities tripled. Cities grew up and out. In cities, criminals flourished and crammed with people. The wealthy fled to the suburbs. A new wave of immigration came from the southern Eastern Europe. Many Europeans came to America for jobs and because Europe was overpopulated. However, many went back to Europe. Churches mostly failed to take stands against poverty and suffering, so many questioned its ambitions. A new generation of urban revivalists emerged. In 1859, Charles Darwin published Origin of Species. The South lagged in education. Booker T. Washington helped by teaching. Webb D. Boy, the first black to get a Ph.D. from Harvard. Colleges and universities sprouted after the Civil War. Urban life was stressful for families. Chapter 26. As whites began to populate the Great West, the Indians increasingly turned against each other. The federal government tried to pacify the Indians with treaties, but this failed. Violence reigned supreme in Indian-white relations. The buffalo started to get massacred for meat and for sport. Gold was discovered in California in the late 1840s. In 1858, the same thing happened in Pikes Peak, Colorado. The Homestead Act of 1862 allowed people to get 160 acres of land. The Great West experienced a population surge as many people moved onto the frontier. The frontier was a state of mind and a symbol of opportunity. Farmers were increasingly starting to produce a single cash crops, since they could then concentrate their efforts. In the late 1880s and early 1890s, droughts, grasshoppers, and searing heat waves made farmers miserable and poor. The Panic of 1893 fueled the passion for the Populist Party. McKinley was calm and conservative. He worked well with his party and avoided major confrontations. Chapter 27. Around the 1880s, U.S. expanded to the world stage. Yellow journalism by Pulitzer and Hearst influenced overseas expansion. Cleveland delayed the annexation of Hawaii. In 1895, Cuba rebelled against Spain. America supported Cuba, and the situation worsened. After this, America got Guam, Puerto Rico, it freed Cuba, and paid $20 million for the Philippines. The Four-Acre Act of 1900 gave Puerto Rico a limited degree of popular government. The Spanish-American War lasted only 113 days. This affirmed America's presence as a world power. And a deranged murderer shot McKinley and made Roosevelt the youngest president at age 42.